Welcome in, everybody. It is your new favorite hockey podcast. This is called Up, the Prospects Podcast. I'm Chris Peters, and joining me is our new co-host. Really excited. You know him, you love him. He's Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects, and he will be with us every single week on Called Up, the Prospects Podcast. And Cam, first of all, it's great to be working with you. I'm really excited to get this thing going. How about you tell the good people what we're going to be doing on this show here?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm very excited about this as well. I think people are going to be able to expect a lot of great information, some enthusiasm, a lot of energy, and just great assessments and intel on prospects from all levels of hockey. Sometimes we're going to, agree on some things, and most of the time we'll bicker like an old married couple, and it'll just make for some great content.
Yeah, that's actually why I wanted a co-host. I needed a sparring partner. I needed somebody to go head to head with. I needed somebody to disagree with. And the great thing is, and we've talked about it, you've been a guest on our previous show, and we've talked about, hey, we've got different opinions about players. We've got different philosophies about how to do the job sometimes as well, and the things that we value. And I think that that's going to make for some really intriguing conversation. We're going to talk about a lot of the things that prospect fans care about. Obviously, the NHL draft, and I can't wait for like mock drafts and different things that we're going to be doing and going back and forth about our player rankings and things like that. But also, the World Juniors is coming up, and that's one of the reasons why we launched this show right now, is because it is one of the best times of the year if you are a fan of prospects. And we've been on the road a lot together. We've talked offline, we've talked on the phone. So some of these conversations that we've been having for years, but now we get to put them a microphone in front of us and a camera in front of us for the audience. And Cam, just before we get into the mix too, I just want to tell the people a little bit about yourself, where your work can be found, and kind of how long you've been in this racket that we're a part of here in the prospects game.
Yeah, for sure. So you were asking me there off air a little while ago too, and so officially I've been kind of in the business of prospects and assessments and all that stuff, working in hockey since 2015, right after my eldest son was born. Unofficially, my whole life, playing the game, I was always super interested, especially in the draft and prospects and stuff like that. But yeah, come 2015, I got on with Dauber Hockey and Dauber Prospects and rose up there a little bit, and then for the last 6 years, been with Elite Prospects and EP Ringside, and it's been great. Last couple of years, it's been full time and been able to get on the road a ton more, like you said, and get to all the major events and get to games more often. And it's a dream job, and I have to pinch myself quite often that this is what I get to do for work. My whole life revolves around hockey, whether it's watching it or coaching it or playing it. It's nothing but hockey. And unfortunately for my wife, she has to put up with me, but it's great for me anyways.
Yeah, I dragged my wife into the hockey parent world here in the last couple of years, and she's enjoying it. But yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. It's like my hobby is hockey as well, coaching kids and whatever else. But what I'm also excited about, obviously, with FloHockey, we've become a place where we're really focused on prospects. Elite Prospects, one of the the brands that people are so familiar with. I mean, it's hard to do what we do and not use Elite Prospects every single day. So, I mean, I'm excited about that, to have our two, the power that these two kind of companies are able to bring together. And I mean, the mega powers have united here in some form, if you will, with Robinson and Peters. If we can toot our own horn that much, I usually don't like to do that, but we're going to do it because, hey, it's a competitive world out there. This is the podcast you need to be checking out. So really excited, to have your expertise and your experience. Obviously I've been doing this as well for quite a few years now at various places. And I think we've probably been talking about prospects on various podcasts for years and years as well. But before we get into all the topics today, we're going to talk about World Juniors. We're going to talk about Gavin McKenna. We're going to talk about the snubs. We're going to talk about all the things going on. We'll also have a weekly AHL segment, and also we've got a few special segments where we're going to take some big topics, kind of debate a little bit, and you guys will become more familiar with it. But before I go any further, I want to remind you, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast on your audio app of choice. You can, Spotify, Apple, wherever it is. And on those platforms, please leave a kind rating and review so that the two of us can continue to share these, this great knowledge, hopefully, that we can share with you regularly. As the audience grows, obviously, that increases more opportunities for our show to do more things and to do a lot more fun stuff and be in various places. So we'll definitely do that as well. But also, you can follow this podcast on the FloHockey platforms, FloHockey.tv, the Flow Sports app, and on the YouTube channel for FloHockey. That's at FloHockey. Where you can find every single episode. So you'll be able to interact with this podcast in a number of ways. So if you don't want to listen to Cam, you can take that extra step, and me too. Sorry, Cam. And me too. You can take that extra step and watch us too, which I love for you. And you'll also be able to see our clips throughout social platforms. But Cam, that's enough yammering on about what the show is, who we are, what we're doing. Let's get into the brass tacks here. It's been a big week in the hockey world, a huge week in the hockey world. Obviously, Four Nations rosters and everything like that. That's cool. That's great. We're prospects guys. The announcements that really mattered to us were the USA and Canada roster announcements. And Team Canada announced their roster. They both announced them on the same day. But let's take a look at what Canada did. It's going to pop up on your screen, Cam, and I'm going to throw a few questions your way here as well about the roster that Canada put together. And the first thing that jumps out to me when I look at what is there in terms of what Hockey Canada has done is the, you look at there's obviously a lot of good stats here, players that we were expected to see. Gavin McKenna is leading everybody. And then you've also got Andrew Cristal, who was a guy that some people thought was on the bubble. He does make it. But what were some of the things that jumped out to you as we take a look at some of the top scorers? And of course, you can always find those statistics on Elite Prospects. But what were some of the things that jumped out to you when you saw the team roster?
Well, I think, and this isn't overly surprising when it comes to Team Canada, is that they are looking to build a proper team and not just an all-star team. And you could say that about the Four Nations roster as well, right? It kind of goes back all the way to that NHL 94 video game where you need your sniper, you need your playmaker, and you need your grinder on the line to make it nice and balanced. And so I think Canada, they get, I don't want to say they galactic brain it sometimes, but they will try to fit pieces, and it is a 19-year-old tournament. Everybody says it every year, and that the brass, they're saying that to themselves too, is that do we bring this 17-year-old or do we bring this 19-year-old who we know can play a two-way game and can play up and down the lineup if we need him to, even if we're sacrificing some skill? And so, they did that. And especially they did that on the blue line, right? There's some big names there that got left off, even the camp invite. And oftentimes we'll see that the final roster, right? We'll see the camp, everyone gets their invite, and then all of a sudden, hey, this guy didn't make the, Seth Jarvis just a couple of years ago didn't make that team, right? Goes back home and just blows it up in the WHL. And now all of a sudden he's playing for Canada at the Four Nations. But so with Canada, They do sometimes get in their own way a little bit, I think, when they're putting together a camp invite list like this or making their own roster. But it's Canada, so they still win half the time because that's just the sheer amount of talent that this country is able to produce. So it's going to be really interesting, but there's a whole heck of a lot of kids sitting there that are like, man, I didn't even get a chance at camp to prove that I'm ready to make this step, even as an 18-year-old and some 19-year-olds too. Some really, really high draft picks that aren't going to be even involved in the process, and that's going to be a tough pill to swallow for them.
Yeah, it is. And we're gonna let you pick your all-snub team here in just a minute. But getting back to what this roster looks like, and I think there was a mandate here. Let's make sure we're bringing experience. Let's make sure we're bringing a lot of 19-year-olds because we are going to have likely Porter Martone and Matthew Schaefer and Gavin McKenna. And so, the youngest guys are potentially going to be the most exciting guys. And here you see the full roster. This is the full list here on your screen. And the defense is where I thought that was especially true. You look at Cam Allen, Bo Akey, Andrew Gibson, Tanner Molendyke, Sawyer Minio, Caden Price, some of the older guys, but then you do have Matthew Schaefer, who's a 2025 and the 2025 draft eligible and is going to very likely make this team. It would appear. And I think he ends up being the guy that's pushed out Seneca Perek and Yakimchuk as well. And that's the thing is wow, well, if Canada thinks he's that good, really, that's impressive. But this blue line may not it doesn't really excite you, right? Like in the way that if you had a Zane Parekh on there, where he's got all those points. But the other thing that I think is interesting was what they did with the goaltending as well. You've got Carter George and Scott Ratzlaff, who I thought, we all pretty much figured would be there. The question was, which draft eligible goalie would they take? And they end up taking Jack Ivankovic instead of Joshua Ravensbergen. And that, I think, raised some eyebrows around, although Ivankovic had a great Hlinka Gretzky Cup. Now, you were there. Did you think at that time you're looking at a goalie that's going to represent Canada at the World Juniors as an underager potentially?
I mean, potentially. And like, yes, he was the third guy at the U18s last year too. He's one of these kids that he's a gamer. He battles hard, but he hasn't been that great this season compared to Ravensbergen, who's been stronger. He's got the big frame. He was at the summer development camp too, and he showed well there. I'm surprised. And just recently, last week or whatever that was, the CHL USA Prospect Showdown, Ravensbergen was the better netminder in that game, in his game versus Ivankovic. So I'm a little surprised that's where they went. Obviously, they're planning long term there with that pick, right? Is that they usually the third goalie comes and maybe he gets a start, but usually he's just watching. And it's to just get, familiarity with the team and for next year and the year after. So that's, they're tipping their hand a little bit on who they think is going to be the better goaltender for Canada at the junior level here in the next couple of years. And for my money, it's not the right choice, even though I like Jack Ivankovic a lot. And he's a great player and he's a great kid. Both of them are, but you give me that 6'5.5" goaltender with that athleticism that Ravensbergen has all day. Like I could see him being a top 15 pick this year, where Ivankovic, I'll be surprised if he goes in the second round. He's probably later into day 2 as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the size matters at the goaltending position, especially for the NHL. I don't think there's any doubt that there's a gap between the two in terms of their NHL outlook relative, whether or not that matters now will remain to be seen. I think the other thing is I wonder if Joshua Ravensbergen going to the summer showcase and kind of getting lit up a little bit almost hurt his cause even though all of the other evidence suggests, hey, this guy's a quality goaltender. He did look very good in that game against the NTDP that you mentioned. But by that point, decisions were pretty much already made, I think. And so that really didn't help him. So we talked about, the guys that'll be there. No question, Canada is still going to be among the favorites. They are going to be a team that has every reason to believe that it can compete for a gold medal. And they've got tremendous offensive firepower. They've got, we showed you all the top scorers and the different things that they've had. But really, I think this whole thing is, whenever we talk about this team, it comes back down to who were the snubs, who were the guys that they left home. And I think in Canada's case specifically, you can almost always make a team that you would feel confident could compete in this tournament among the top teams. And Cam, you decided to go ahead and do just that. You created an all-snub team. And I think that this would actually be an interesting thing for the listeners to hear, because you look at some of the names on there and you're like, that's a pretty darn good team. One name that you won't see that was news that broke yesterday, Tej Ginla, hip surgery, done for the year. Before we get to the all-snub team, I know Tej is a player that you've been very high on, but boy, a hip surgery as a teenager scares the heck out of me. What are you thinking about, when we heard that come down?
Yeah, I as soon as the list came out for the invites, I started texting people that I knew, and I quickly heard that Tej had been battling something all year, and that he wasn't going to be ready to compete 100% at camp. I didn't realize he was going to get shut down immediately with that surgery. I mean, I think he dropped 5 points the game before he went in for surgery too. So whatever, if the hip was bugging him, it wasn't affecting him too badly. He was obviously gutting it out and playing through some pain there, which just speaks to, he's his father's son, right? He's a battler, he's a grinder, and he's got all that skill to go along with it too. So unfortunately, the all-snub team loses its top line left winger there in Tej. But I mean, it is scary. Hip stuff is concerning. We look at Tyler Seguin, just went on the shelf again for hips. It's something that hopefully, he can get it cleaned up and he can rehab and it won't be a problem for him long term. And that sometimes can happen, with netminders anyways. You see some guy, like I remember Thatcher Demko, he had both hips done in college and then it hasn't been an issue for him since. So you hope the best for Tej. And I think that with the Rockets getting the Memorial Cup next year, everybody's probably trying to play it safe. Utah's probably trying to play it safe for them. The Rockets are probably like, we need him and we got to rebuild this team so that we can host the Memorial Cup. Like if it's best to shut him down now and then he can have the whole offseason to train and get better. And hell, he might make that Utah team next year too if he's healthy and runs, but losing half the season probably puts a kibosh on that. So hopefully as a 19-year-old, he's ready to go. He'll be on that team, that World Junior team next year for Canada if he's healthy without question. And then he's got a big Memorial Cup ahead of him too. So it's going to be a big year after a long recoup after the surgery for him.
Yeah. So, obviously you feel for him but you hope for the best and that, this is more precautionary. But yeah, I think with Kelowna getting the Memorial Cup, it also changes the calculus of the season ahead. And you say, hey, why don't we get this right so that you're ready to go next season? It's a long-term recovery, obviously. All right, let's get to the All-Snub Team, which I think is what everybody's waiting for. And Cam, who do you got at forward for this All-Snub Team? Let's start with your top 6 for this All-Snub Team.
Sure. This is like we're kicking it back to like U17s, right? With Canada white and black and
yeah.
red and black, whatever it is that they get to send in 2 teams and often they meet in the gold medal game. So I'm not sure if this team's going to make the gold medal at the World Juniors, but I think they compete for a medal. So top 6, you got Michael Misa, right? The kid's he's second in OHL scoring. I think third in CHL scoring. Porter just passed him. He got that suspension for flicking a teddy bear into the stands. He's playing down the middle. He's got Green Tree, first rounder, big body, 6'3" winger who can play up and down the rink. He, in my mind, might be the biggest snub from that invite camp, is that he's someone that could legitimately play in the top 6, the bottom 6. He could be your 13th forward. He can be heavy in the corners. He can score goals. Liam Greentree is a big, big miss. You got Nick Lardis, another really high octane player. Lots of offense there. Second line, you got Michael Hage. We know they don't like to invite a ton of guys from the NCAA. He's having a great year. He's just a point behind Jimmy Haggins among freshmen, among U19 guys, U20 guys. And then, Beckett Seneca. You got to go back 35 years. In the last 35 years, there's 2 third overall picks that weren't playing in the NHL that didn't make the World Juniors the year after they're drafted. And it's him and JP Dumont. Like it's wild that he didn't even get the invite to that camp. And now he's dropped 11 points in the last 2 games too. So he's just really kind of rubbing it in the face. So Seneca, that one's, I know a lot of people are like, yeah, he shouldn't have been the third overall pick just because it was a surprise at 3. But the kid's highly, highly talented. So him not getting an invite, that's a big miss as well too. And then rounding him out, I'm giving it Malcolm Spence just because he's a favorite of mine and another one who can just play anywhere in the lineup. But he's got the skill, he's got the snarl, he can drive the net. He's a draft eligible as well too, obviously, but he's on the older side. He's already 18 years old. So that would be the top 6 that I'm looking at on the All-Snub forward group.
Yeah, and before we go to the rest of the forwards, and I'll just have you buzz through those quick once we get through this. But I think you look at some of the different things, and you start kind of running through the reasons why maybe certain guys like Liam Greentree, one of the guys who's having a really strong season, has the size. But then you were there too. You go back to that U18 World Championship. How much did that hang in the balance of the minds of the decision makers? Because that was. I mean, honestly, that tournament hurt his draft stock at that point because he kind of fell down into the 13th forward position, couldn't really get the ice. And that was really surprising for a lot of us that had seen him throughout the year. So you just wonder sometimes, and then you look at like Malcolm Spence is an interesting guy too. I think like if you look at the actual roster, Cole Baudouin is kind of that guy that's going to bring that little bit of snarl and the two-way capabilities, the strength. And he's a center, so you've got kind of some of those things. So, but yeah, I mean, you think about the under 18 World Championship team that won a gold medal that beat James Hagens and that really, that US team, those guys aren't going to be there. So let's just quickly buzz through the last grouping of players, your bottom 6 and your 13th forward here for the All-Snub team.
Yeah, we're looking at Justin Carbo there in the queue. dangle machine, but he also showed, especially last week at that CHL prospects game, is that he can play some hard skill and he can play down the lineup and he can do it effectively. Caleb Desnoyers, right? He's going to be a top 10 pick this year. Really detailed centerman. Again, can play all over the lineup. Cameron Schmidt, yeah, he's 5'7", maybe 7.5 if you give him a little up on those skate blades. But man, just dynamic speed and an elite release and a lot of fun. He drives the net. Grayson Sauchin, pure skill guy, but a 19-year-old who's having a good season, popping off offensively. Carter Bear, who has the best name in the draft, but also is just a pugilist out there who's scoring goals, racking up points, nearly 2 points a game in the West this year. Tarek Parasak, right? The first rounder last year, he's an 18-year-old. He scores goals like crazy. And then Clark Caswell too, another older kid who's just puts up points, right? So it's just some of these guys that just didn't even get a sniff that from any other nation would be a lock. I think most of those players would have been a lock for almost every other nation.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a possibility there, and Grayson Sachin, dual citizen too. Was there ever any thought of sniping him at one point? But yeah, that's an interesting dynamic there. The where it gets real fun is, I think, in this blue line, and we'll take a little bit more here with the blue line, and then we're going to get to Team USA here in just a second, and they don't have as robust an all-snub team that we're going to be able to name, so we're not going to do it for them. But for Canada, let's just get to it. I mean, who was your top 6D for this team, and make your case.
I mean, I think everybody wants to know is Zane Parak, right? Is that I don't think anybody can honestly look you in the face and say that there is a better pure offensive defender available in this tournament, right? Like, and he didn't even get the invite. So he is so dynamic offensively. I know the Flames that, they recognize it's a 19-year-old tournament and everything like that too, but it is disappointing for the Flames. I think it's disappointing for him and his club team too, is that he's not even getting a sniff. And yes, there are some blunders defensively at times. He can be a little singular minded offensively, but he should have been working the top power play on that team. And the fact that he's not there, he'll work it on the snub team, no problem. Carter Yakimchuk, right? Almost made the Senators as an 18-year-old. And I love Steve Stales coming out and being like, if I just decided to keep him, which we almost did, Team Canada would be banging down my door right now to get me to lend him down to him. So that was the only difference, is that all of a sudden Ottawa was like, we won't rush him. We'll send him down a month and a half early. And now
Team Canada, I think was the right call, by the way.
Absolutely. Don't rush your young defensemen. That's like, look at David Urasek. We just thought, right? It stagnates their development too. But with Yakimchuk, I do get it a little bit because, and I'm sorry to Sens fans here and Hitman fans, but he's kind of a lesser version of Sam Dickinson. And Dickinson's just having this insane season, right? And so is there really a place for both of them on that blue line, especially with Canada, the way they want to bring Sorminio to bang or Gibson to bang, right? And be that net front clearing guy. And that's not really Yakimchuk's game. So those guys, big miss. Landon DuPont, I just had to put him on there. The 15-year-old has just been unbelievable for Everett this year, right? So to have a kid like that in there, Miskey, Morin, Morelli, like these guys are older guys who could just fill in the lineup and fill in some of the guys' faces at the net front and banging in the boards and moving some pucks if they need to. But all that offense from DuPont and Parak and even Yakimchuk, right? It's going to be, snubs are going to be doing all right from the blue line, moving that puck up and out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it makes it the one that I, definitely have looked at is Parak and trying to figure out, I do think that he has a dynamic that they don't have on their team, because I love Matthew Schaefer. I think he's got that, but he's not that dynamic offensively as Parak is, nor is Sam Dickinson for all the points that he's put up this year. So, and the other thing too is, it's not like Sam Dickinson runs a top power play typically. Is he going to be the number one power play guy for Canada? I mean, like that's where things get real interesting. And I'm fascinated to see kind of how they structure their D and everything else. And then, we'll just not to glance over the goalies, but we pretty much already talked about Ravensburgen. He'd be the number one guy for you. And if he were, on the all-snub team, he'd be starting every game. He wouldn't be coming out. You just hope he doesn't get hurt in that situation. But Ravensburgen is Cam's all-snub starter, and And who else did you have on there for that? As I'm miss my spot on my page here.
Nice. I had Gardner on backing him up too. And just a quick note on Schaefer too on that blue line is that like I had someone in the know 10 days ago say to me that like Schaefer has played his way into like legitimately making that team and going to get an invite. But they even said like he's got to beat out Perek basically, right? And maybe Yakimchuk to get that job. Well, then neither of them get the invite. And so it's like, yeah, like is looking at that roster, I don't really love the idea of Sam Dickinson being that quarterback on a top power play. That's not, that wasn't even, he didn't even play top power play all that much last year. Yes, he's playing it this year, but he's not the quarterback so much. He's got the big shot and he can move the puck around. But so is it going to be Matt Schaefer? Is it going to be this barely turned 17-year-old that's running the top power play for Canada? And like, I love Matthew Schaefer and that's fine. And I think he can handle it, but it's a tall ask from a kid, especially when you're leaving a guy like Perek at home.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion, and really that's the thing. I have a feeling that Matthew Schaefer, when all is said and done, will be one of the top 2 ice time guys for that team. That's my take on where that is going, because they left those guys out because of him. And they're not leaving them home. So, all right. Well, you are the Canadian on the show. I am the American on the show. We've got to talk about Team USA. Dropped about an hour after Canada's roster came out, I think. And Team USA is out there. And we're going to, take a quick look at this. They are going to have a few cuts to make. There weren't a lot of surprises. I don't think, we had talked about Quentin Musty, not on the team. He did break his wrist. Both you and I heard the same thing, that it was very unlikely that he was going to even make the camp. I think that's kind of, the thing about that is you look at what he's done. Obviously, big body, he can score, but it's been a weird year for him because he held out for a bit trying to get a trade from Sudbury. Nothing materialized. Kind of has to go back. Produces at a high level, but talking to some of the scouts that had seen him since that, there's a souring happening on him. I think because of compete. Foot speed, different things like that. And then now he's injured, so he's not ultimately going to make it. But, just real quick, Cam, as I said that, any thoughts on that, knowing that he probably wasn't going to be there?
Yeah, he burned that bridge, man. That bridge is long cooked too. So, when we heard those things, that was not a surprise to us. Right. And so some of the things we can't talk about on the show on air, but yes, he made his position well known, and so did USA Hockey, and I don't see them making a kumbaya anytime soon. Hopefully down the road, maybe somewhere you can go play at a world championship or something, and maybe break down those barriers again as both sides mature and age past it. But not having Quentin Musty there because of the injury, that was just off the table. But if they had left him at home, that would have been, like you said, a big-bodied, skilled kid who would have every right to be on that team with his skill level, even with the odd season that he's had. He had such a tremendous year. I think very highly of Quentin Musty. I think he's going to be a very strong NHL player too. So I think that absolutely he should have had a place on that team if he was healthy, but he wouldn't have, and he isn't. So now they can just the Team USA has got to be hating Will Smith all of a sudden catching a little bit of fire with the Sharks, because I think that they were holding their breath, hoping, wishing and praying that maybe, just maybe, that he gets sent back. But I think after he won the ship last year, that probably was burned.
Yeah. So those are the guys that aren't going to be there. We will talk about the guys that are there. And you just saw it on your screen there for a second. If we can bring it up again, I just want to run through it real quick, because this is, it's an interesting roster. Obviously, I think when you look at the top of this roster, the forwards are the ones that stand out in terms of, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault, James Higgins. That's your top line right there. I mean, it's pretty easy to do it. After that, it gets a little more interesting. Oliver Moore is a returnee. They've got this roster is going to have as many as 10 returnees without Will Smith, who is eligible to return. They even bring back their third goalie, Sam Hillebrandt, who was there. But you've got Zeev Buium and Drew Fortescue on the blue line. Aaron Manetian, who did not play in last year's tournament, but is there up front in terms of returnees. It's Leonard, Perreault, Moore. You've got Danny Nelson. And so that's a solid group. And really the guy that matters the most in this whole thing, Cam, to me, is Trey Augustine. I think if there's one advantage Team USA has over every single team in this tournament, it is goaltending. And I think it's strictly because you got Trey Augustine. This will be his third World Junior Championship. But that is the guy that I think will be real interesting. But before we talk about Trey, the biggest surprise to me, and maybe it was to you as well, was when we saw Blake Fiddler's name on the defense. He plays for the Edmonton Oil Kings. He is a U.S. Canadian dual citizen. His dad is Vernon Fiddler, who played in the NHL. But Cam, you and I were at that CHL Top Prospects game. Blake Fiddler was playing for Team CHL. He has played for Canada and the USA in the past. I did ask him at the tournament, you're going to have a decision to make. What country would you play for? And he said that he was going to play for, basically without saying it specifically, he said, I think I've made my decision, intimating that it was going to be Team USA. So but so now this is the interesting thing, right? Blake Fiddler is, for the first time that I can remember, is a U18 player, draft eligible player, U18 specifically, so an underage player for this tournament, from outside of the national team development program. That has not happened to my knowledge. I looked back. I don't think it's ever happened that they've taken a player that is an underager from outside of the NTDP, much less one from the CHL. And all of a sudden, with the way that decor is set up, it's justifiable on the merits. But, what did you think when you saw his name on there?
Yeah, a couple things popped right into my head. Number one, like you said, is that on skill and size and speed alone, like valid invite, is that he's good enough to be there. But the first thing that jumped into my mind was, is this like in any way like a little carrot? It's like, come play for USA. Like I was joking around there last week being like, he was the captain of the Holinka team, obviously no program players. Is that he's going to get airlifted onto that American U18 team at the end of the year, and they're going to slap a letter on his shirt, right? Like we saw, it was Connolly last year and Mooney, the two guys that get, they usually like sprinkle in a couple kids onto that team for the U18s, but they're not getting leadership roles. I could definitely see Fiddler getting an A or even the C on his sweater at the U18s, but I just wondered if they're like, make sure you come over to USA, even though I didn't really think it was ever in question. He said it, like he said to you too, right? Is that he grew up in the States. He grew up in Dallas. I think he still stays in Dallas most of in his off season too. And so he considers himself an American. And American fans, it's an easier path for him to make the World Juniors. Is to be on that U18 team. He'd be on the Canadian one, but to make that World Junior team. And I was thinking next year. I wasn't thinking this year, but he might make it this year too on that blue line. Is that he's a really interesting player with the size and the mobility, and I like him. He's a fun kid too. Getting to chat with him off ice a few times here, he's got some character to him too. So I like him, and I think it's a valid invite, and I hope he makes a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is with these rosters, you can take 23 skaters now, or 22 skaters now, and can play them. So if he's there as a 7 or 8 defenseman, 8th defenseman, and he's registered, he's locked in. So I think a lot of people thought, is this to push that ahead? I think, it sounds like, like you said, there's probably going to be a chance for him to play at the under 18 World Championship, which is in his home market. It's in Allen and Frisco. So those are really good things. But I mean, this goes against precedent, and this is something that USA Hockey has usually said, no way are we doing that. But in this instance, they go ahead and do it, and I think it's right. And part of the other thing that this says to me, Cam, is that the blue line pool, you're only bringing an underage defenseman if your blue line is shallow, and theirs is. You've got Zeev Bouillon and Drew Fortescue at the top. Cole Hudson and EJ Emery are a pairing from last year's under 18 team, and Hudson has power play potential. I think those are, potentially pairings you keep together. After that, it's a real crapshoot. I think, Paul Fisher has a case. Logan Hensler has a case, a great case. Adam Kleber, Colin Ralph, who's had a phenomenal year at St. Cloud State this year. So they're able to have, and you bring a guy like Fiddler, he also has size on his side as well, because Bouillon and really Cole Hudson are the two guys that don't necessarily have the size. Fortescue's more on the average side, but they're going to have a pretty big blue line based on what they're going to be able to bring here, and so it's going to be fascinating to see. But again, I want to get back to Trey Augustine, because To
Mhm.
me, the difference between Team USA has never won a back-to-back gold medals at this tournament. The only way that I think it happens, because it's always hard to go back-to-back, and they certainly have a roster capable of competing for gold. But the reason that I feel strongly about their chances is Trey Augustine. I mean, what have you seen from him over the last couple of years? That am I completely off base here in thinking that this is a guy that is among the top young goalie prospects that we have in the game today?
Oh, without a question, man. He's a showstopper, right? All he does is win. He puts up huge numbers and he wins. And I'm with you, is that I think him and Bouillon, I think are the key turners for that team on the back end and in net, right? Is that we know that they have enough offensive firepower up front that they should be able to hang with Canada and Sweden. But it's Trey is so talented. I think that he can not only steal a game, but he could steal the entire tournament. He's that good. And then Z Bouillon, I think, is probably going to be the best defenseman at the whole event. Like, he is that good. I am so high on Z Bouillon, and what he did last year as a draft eligible kid with the role just kept climbing through the round robin into the medal stages, and playing big minutes down the stretch in that gold medal game too. And he's got the shimmy, he's got the shake, he's got the great offensive stuff, but he also has great defensive skills too, and the skating to go along with it. So those two, then you pack on some beef on that back end too to try to clear the net and really kind of bang with some of those physical forwards that the Canadian team will have too. Is that, yeah, it's gonna be a dogfight too. It's especially coming out of that bracket of death, or the pool of death, or whatever you want to call it, with Finland too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be tough. You got USA and Canada. They're playing on New Year's Eve. I think it's going to be one of the most anticipated games in the World Juniors in recent memory. You think about James Higgins versus Porter Martone and Matthew Schaefer for the battle for number one. You think about Gavin McKenna getting his first crack at the U.S. since absolutely dominating at that under-18 World Championship last year. You just think of all the different things that are coming to the fore, and I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be absolutely exciting and outstanding. Now, we don't have the final rosters for these teams. These camp rosters, there will be cuts made, but we have a good idea of what those rosters are going to look like. And based on what you're seeing on paper, Cam, USA versus Canada, if we think they're both the gold medal favorites, who really is the gold medal favorite in your eyes?
It's Canada. But but not by a country mile.
The Canadian to say. That's what I expected
right?
the Canadian
but not
to
by
say.
a country mile. Yeah. Like you said, it's hard to go back to back unless you're Canada, and then you might win 5 straight a couple of times. But I digress. But no, I think it is still Canada, even with some of those guys that I'm not so happy are getting left behind. And we'll see who gets left behind even from that team too, right? All of a sudden they cut Matty Schaefer or something. Then I'll switch allegiances, and you'll see me with an American flag on my back. But no, I do think it's still Canada as the favorites. But we can't rule out the Swedes either, man. Those sneaky Swedes over there, they're not going to be a pushover, and they got an easier pool, so they should have a nice little dance to the semis, and then things are going to get tough.
Yeah, their tournament doesn't start until the semifinals. It feels like. I mean, it's them and not a lot else. And in the second part of the other side of the bracket, we will talk about Sweden in our upcoming segment. But I'll give you mine. I do think there's three reasons. I put up yours there for a second. Now I'm putting up 3 for the camera. 3 reasons. Trey Augustine is number 1 for me. Z Bouillon, as you mentioned, is number 2. And number 3 is Ryan Leonard. Ryan Leonard, to me, is a guy. He had the opportunity to sign and play in the Stanley Cup playoffs last year with the Washington Capitals. He said no, partially because he was really devastated about the national championship not winning with Boston College. And the other thing that stuck in his mind was the opportunity to do something that's never happened before for Team USA. This is right. They didn't get Will Smith back, but I think even if they did, this was Ryan Leonard's team. I think that they are going to play kind of in his image, which is a little bit in your face with some, playing a physical game, but also a high-end offensive game. He has been a Hobey Baker guy this year in college hockey. I think that, it's not just because I'm American. I actually often pick against the United States in these scenarios. I picked them to win last year. I'm going to stick with them this year. And now we have our USA-Canada rivalry, our first fight on the podcast. We disagree. So I'm going to mark that one down in our little scrapbook that we're making for Called Up the Prospects podcast. I didn't tell you about that, but we're going to have one now.
So I guess the big question now is like, what's on the table here? What's the juice? Is it, are you getting a Canadian tattoo somewhere if I win, or we wear,
oh, wow.
we wearing the other team's
save that.
jersey?
Let's save that for the World Junior preview that we're going to have. We're going to have a mega preview for all you fans out there. And I think there will have to be some significant wager made. We put our journalistic integrity aside and we say, this is what we'll do. So we'll figure it out. Let's give ourselves some time to think about it. I like where we're at. But we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to keep it kind of World Junior centric, but we're going to go and do a little bit more of this rapid fire kind of topics. And it's in a segment we're going to call Beyond Belief, because there are things that we hear out there that are true or that we agree with, and there are things out there that we think are ridiculous and we don't agree with. So the way this is going to work, one of us will give the other a basic statement. It doesn't mean that the person that's reading it believes that. It's just that that's what's on the script and that's what we're going to say. And then the two of us will talk a little bit about it. And so a lot of these questions are World Juniors related, but there are a few that are not. And so I will kick us off in this. So Cam Robinson, my co-host, Canada will suffer from leaving talent home again. Your thoughts?
Well, I just picked them to win gold, Chris. But yes, I do think they will suffer. They will suffer. Maybe they'll still overcome it. But yes, I do think they will suffer from leaving talent at home again. And it'll probably be on the power play and on that blue line. I think that they will suffer because of it. How about you?
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting. I will say it's beyond belief because of the firepower that they have. I mean, really what it comes down to when I look at the way that Canada was constructed, yes, I do think like this might, and when we say suffer, doesn't mean they lose one of the games in the prelims. Do they lose on New Year's Eve? Do they, you know, maybe stumble in the quarters or something like that, where suddenly all these things are kind of, there's a lot of pressure. And when you're on home ice, anything can happen, right? But I think that they'll make up for it. Like when you look, when the roster is finally decided and you look at their top six versus like, let's say USA's top six, it's going to look pretty favorable, right? But again, yeah, you're right. I think when you look at the blue line, if we're saying, oh, these guys are getting turnstiled and they're not producing offensively, then we might see, then you could say it. But yeah, you sir, it's yeah, anything can happen at the World Juniors, but to me, I think Canada has enough to overcome any perceived slights and snubs, even though I think your all-snub team looks pretty good.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. All right, I got one for you here. Matthew Schaefer, the #1 overall pick. The hype is real. Is it true?
I'm gonna agree with that statement. I think it's real. I'm not saying that he is definitely going #1. I'm not saying that I would that he's #1 on my list right now. What I will say is that the buzz around Matthew Schaefer is growing, and I completely agree with it and see it because the guys that he's competing with, James Higgins, Porter Martone, they both played really well, right? They've done some good things. But the thing is if I look at Porter Martone, I look at James Higgins, I say, okay, well, can I say definitively that James Higgins is a #1 center in the NHL? I don't know that I can necessarily say that at this moment in time. I think he's on track to being a very impressive player. But like, you know, what if he's more like the Will Smith kind, where he's like, okay, he's the #2 center on a really good team, or maybe he moves to the wing. Porter Martone is a winger, you know, and probably never going to play center. And that's another thing. But as I look at Matthew Schaefer, I say, this guy looks like a #1 defenseman. This guy looks like a minutes eating defenseman. At that CHL top prospects team, he was the best player on the ice. And I didn't feel like there was anybody real close to him, you know, to me. And so that to me is where I see it. So I think the hype is real. If he has a big World Juniors, it's going to be deafening at that point. So what say you?
I say that I'm kicking myself that during the Holinka when I said you're looking at the #2 overall pick right now, and I was miles ahead of the train there. The hype train is that I should have said you're looking at the first overall pick. No, I love Matthew Schaefer. I think absolutely everything. I agree with everything you just said. Is that the hype isn't just hype? It is legitimate and it is warranted, and he has earned it. And like you said, is that, you know, even toss Michael Misa into the mix there, a contender for first, is that, you know, speed driven, big questions if he's a center. I know he wins a ton of faceoffs in the O, but a lot of NHL guys I talk to, they question the details and whether he can play the middle of the ice. And so now you're looking at potentially 2 or 3 wingers versus a kid who looks like a number 1D and is the youngest kid in the class, right? He's a whisper away, a cough and a fart away from being in the 26 class. And he's gonna push into number 1 at this one too. So I think it's gonna be really interesting because James Haggins is gonna be in such a favorable position at the WJC, centering that top line. And, you rattled off Leonard and Buyam and Augustine. Those could be your top 4, top D, and top goaltender. But Haggins is going to be playing with Leonard and Perreault, and he's going to jack a ton of points. He's going to look good there. And that's going to reestablish him as being a potential number 1 pick again here, where I think a lot of people have kind of fallen off that train just because of how demonstrative the point totals have been for Martone and for Misa and how well Schaefer's played. So I do think it's very real, the first overall hype for Schaefer.
All right. So we talked a little bit about Sweden's roster, and Sweden has, they've got some really talented guys: Axel Sandin Pellikka, Tom Willander. You got Theo Lindstein, Otto Stenberg. You've got so many good players on that team. Who will not be there, though, is Anton Frundell. The guy came into the season with a lot of hype. Even some people thought maybe he could be number 1. So Cam Robinson, I ask you, Sweden will regret, or I say to you, I don't ask you, Sweden will regret not bringing Anton Frundell to the World Junior Championship.
It's beyond belief. They're not going to regret it, I don't think. I personally am, because this is like tournament number 4 I've shown up to trying to get some live looks on this kid, and he's never there. He's always injured or he's not getting the invite. So it's disappointing for us. But there's just some about Frundell, and it's whether it's all the injuries piling up and limiting his development, or maybe he's just one of these players who peaked a little bit early and he's not maintaining that kind of runway. Is that I haven't been all that thrilled with his game when he has been healthy and he's been playing. He's fine. I think he has good two-way habits. I think he's still got that cannon of a one-timer on the power play, but I question the pure offensive upside and what, I'm sure he would have fit in fine on that team in a bottom 6 role, but I don't think he was going to move the needle enough to make them regret not even bringing him to camp if he was healthy enough to be there.
Yeah, and there is, one of his teammates will be there, Victor Eklund, also draft eligible. Mm-hmm. And so that, that also kind of makes things, I agree with you. I think it's beyond belief. I think that he is, it has been a really tough year. He is going to the World Junior A Challenge, which is where the under 18 team for Sweden will play, as long as he's healthy. And that's the thing, is there have been just too many injuries, and it's real unfortunate. So that's the way it goes.
Okay, this one's going to get you fired up. Czechia will regret not bringing Dominik Badinka or Radim Mrtka to the WJC. I got thoughts.
Yeah, I know you got thoughts, and I'm gonna leave this. I'm gonna make my comments brief so I can let you go. But this one is it's beyond belief that they're not bringing them, or at least one of them. That's what's beyond belief. I mean, really, Dominik Badinka, 2nd round draft pick of the Carolina Hurricanes, great size. Basically, from everything we've been hearing, it sounds like there's a miscommunication or misconnection with the coach, and it's not, there's some bad blood, and the thing is that if you are a country like Czechia in this tournament, there are only so many players that you have in your pool every year that can compete with the top players. You've got to find a way to finish in the top 2 of your group to have a chance to really move past the quarterfinal, I feel like. And they'll still probably, because of the weakness of that bracket, they'll probably still finish 2nd. But to not have Dominik Badinka or Radim Mrtka, who's a top draft eligible defenseman who has size, who has had success, he was excellent at the Lincoln Gretzky Cup, they don't have the depth to make up for those losses.
No. And I started kicking around on Badinka too, is that, there's talk of something happened in the summer and that, teams are trying to play, everyone was trying to smooth it over before this. I had somebody tell me that it goes back all the way to years and years ago when him and his brother left home to go play in Finland to get some better competition and then moved to Sweden to get even better competition. But I mean, Czechia, they got lots of players that don't stay at home.Maybe they didn't leave as early, or maybe they left even way earlier and they ended up in the US when they were 13, and then you can't really hound them too much. But I mean, yeah. Badinka, he's been a full-timer in the SHL for, over a year now, basically. Should have been a first rounder. should be their number one defenseman. If you're asking me, he should have been on that top pairing. And then for Murka, I mean, he wasn't getting any playing time. So he came out to the West. He's in Seattle. Guys, he's averaging like 27 minutes a night through his first few games. He looks like a top pairing number one D for the Thunderbirds. He's 6'6". I think he's right shot too. He brings everything. Both those players should have been locks in their top four, and to not even bring him to camp, like that's insanity to me. And when they do get bounced in the quarters because of it, they only have themselves to blame.
I'll tell you, it is beyond shocking and beyond belief, quite frankly, as the segment is called. All right, this is our last one for this segment, and I'm going to be fascinated to hear your answer. We may have differing ones. We kind of referenced it a little bit earlier. Michael Misa, one of the top prospects for the 2025 NHL draft, was suspended one game for shooting teddy bears back into the crowd after the teddy bear toss goal scored against the Saginaw Spirit. The statement is, Michael Misa should not have been suspended one game for shooting teddy bears back in the stands. Cam Robinson, what do you say?
I should have given him 10. Hey, putting the fans at risk. Unbelievable behavior. Yeah. Put him on the do not draft list. No, did you see the clip of it? Like, he was just having some fun flicking it back over the glass so some kids can toss some more bears. Not like there wasn't a shortage of bears that night, but I mean, there's been a couple of questionable suspies there in the OHL in the last couple of years, but this one takes the cake. Like, no malicious intent. I mean, it's not like Saginaw was getting pumped or something like that and he was frustrated. They were up in the game. It's a charity thing with teddy bears and kids. It's like there was no malice in it, and they should have been able to watch that clip or talk to anybody who was there on the icy officials and be like, yeah, no problem here, right? So he should not have been suspended for that. But I mean, give him a little one gamer off and he can hang out.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I actually disagree. I think this was warranted. Because, and I'll tell you why. I mean, like, because of what you said, this is a charity event. This is a thing where it's like, those bears are supposed to be going to local charities and things like that. Now, he didn't put any fans at risk, obviously, but there is rules. Obviously, you can't shoot things from the playing surface into the stands. Last year, we saw a member of the Toledo Walleye. It looked like a chicken nugget got thrown at his feet, and he shot it out of play and got a 10-minute misconduct last year. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. But I think this is more just like, I've never seen this happen before. But you know what? You know who really should have been suspended? Michael DiPietro, back when he was in the OHL. He had like 3 shutouts on teddy bear toss nights for the home team. That was very Grinch-like behavior. And if nothing else, you get one game for being a Grinch. And as much as I don't think this is not a reflection on Michael Misa's character. This is not a thing that but yes, be game for Grinchy behavior. All right.
I mean, we're
going to move on to a real quick segment here. We will talk about the AHL every week. And there's one thing that, I wanted to talk about, and that's the Chicago Wolves. It's in the World Junior theme because the Chicago Wolves will have 2 players at the World Junior Championship. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about their season as a whole, because they've been one of the more interesting stories in the AHL. And, Cam, Carolina's obviously having a strong season. They've got some great players. Seth Jarvis makes the Canadian Four Nations team. But this has been an unhappy marriage between Carolina and the Chicago Wolves. And Chicago went without an affiliation last year. It really hurt them in terms of their ability to compete. This year, they've relinked with Carolina. The roster is very, very young. 23.9 years old is the average age on that roster. They do have some guys that, some older players that pull that up a little bit, but it's a largely very young roster, as evidenced by having 2 players even still eligible to go back to the World Juniors. They're 7-9-1, 5th in the Central, 13th in the Western Conference. But the thing is that the AHL, to me, it's always difficult, like, especially when you have an independently owned team as the Chicago Wolves are. Don Levin is not happy that he's getting a team that's very young, because it is hard to compete with a team that is very young. However, the AHL's philosophy is developing talent. And by all we can see from the Chicago Wolves at this point is that those young guys are getting the opportunities that they need to have to reach the NHL level. So, Cam, I'm just, curious about your thoughts about kind of that whole dispute between the 2 sides. And, is there really a way for this to end any other way than these 2 teams are probably gonna have new affiliates in the near future?
I think, sorry, excuse me. I think Carolina would love to have a different affiliate. And like you said, the Wolves they've long made it their mandate that they want to win Calder Cups, right? They want to fill seats, sell tickets, and they want to win. And so having development as your number one priority, that limits that, as you just said, right? Having a young lineup, they're not doing that great this year. But I mean, when you've got a kid like Felix Ungersorum and Bradley Nadeau in your top six, and you got Scott Morrow playing a ton of minutes on the blue line, that's excellent for Carolina. That's not so great for Chicago because, sure, fans might come out to watch some of these young kids play, but they're not a bunch of Carolina Hurricanes fans there in Chicago. So it's like you, I think that it's not meant to be a long-term marriage. It's just something that had to happen because they tried last year not to have an affiliate in Chicago. It was just a mess, right? So it is a young team and it's great for development right now, but I'm sure the Wolves are itching to get away from it too.
Yeah, I think it's both. It's definitely a mutual kind of like, hey, this isn't going to be a long-term solution, and we'll see exactly how that works out. Who shuffles around, but there have been bright spots this year, and one of them is Scott Morrow. He is second on the team in points right now. He has been a real, he needed the AHL badly. Like, this is a player that has tremendous skill, good offensive ability. We know he's going to produce, but he really does have to learn how to defend as a pro. And it hasn't always been an easy thing for him, but that's a higher skill guy. And I think that he's really one of the players that are, that you would hope to see continue to grow and develop here. Bradley Nadeau, the points haven't necessarily come. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. So he signs after 1 year at Maine, and that was one where I felt he had a great season at Maine. He did not dominate the collegiate game the way that a one and done typically does. So when we talk about Bradley Nadeau, what do you think about his where he's at now, and whether, in that whole decision now to enter pro hockey early? It obviously hasn't hurt him because he's going to make, he's got a chance to make Team Canada's roster.
Yeah, it was very interesting, to say the least, because, we saw what he did as a draft eligible and just destroy the BCHL for the Penticton Vees, right? Like, his shot, he was nearly a goal game at the JA level. And that's what propelled him into being a first round pick. I love the kid. I love his release, but 5'11", 175 pounds. So he's not a big body guy to handle the rigors of the pro game. And then to go from junior A straight to Maine, have a really good season in Maine too, right? Scored 20 goals, nearly put up 50 points, was a really strong player, but like you said, didn't physically dominate and didn't put up like astronomical. He didn't put up 65 points or something like that. So for him to turn pro right away, that did definitely, I was like, oh, interesting. And I'm sure Carolina had a big hand in that, is that they felt he was ready for another challenge. And, I heard some whispers that like he was getting a very long look of making that Hurricanes roster right out of camp. Like, that he wasn't far off, that it was either, okay, we're going to put you in, slot you in like on our second line right now as a 18-year-old, or we're going to send you down. You're going to be a first line winger for the Wolves all season. And so they opted for option number 2 there. And so, like you said, the numbers aren't eye popping right now. He's barely clicking at half a point a game. So I think this little break, which I'm assuming he's going to be on Team Canada, that is, I don't think he's a lock, that break will be enough to get that that mojo back going again, right? Because he is a highly skilled guy, really, really talented player. And that one-shot goal scoring ability should help Canada if he's playing on, say, their third line or something like that.
Yeah, and there we see his first pro goal from with the Chicago Wolves. And Cam, to your point, seeing the what we've seen all year actually from him is it's coming along. Like, he has certain things that he does real well. The speed, the shot. I mean, gosh, Cam, did anybody have a better one-timer in his draft class? I mean, the some of the goals that he was putting up with the Penticton Vees in the BCHL, really remarkable. But right there, you saw him, getting his first pro goal. The question, we talked, he almost made or he had a chance to make the Hurricanes. They do end up sending him back. But I've also heard there are some people out there that say he might be on the bubble for Team Canada. I mean, what do you say to that?
I mean, he 19-year-old kid playing pro hockey, has a history of jacking huge points, but has never played with Canada, right? Never played
Yeah.
internationally with Canada. And I was talking about this on a different show earlier this week, is that it is hard for some of these guys that don't have an established relationship with Hockey Canada, with USA Hockey, with whoever, is that they have these relationships built that sometimes go all the way back to, 16 years old. And so they're familiar with some of these players. And so for him, I think he really needs to show out and show that he's like, hey, I've been playing pro hockey now for the last 2 months. I have the details in my game that you need, that if, like I said, if he's your third line winger and someone gets injured or someone gets icy, boom, he can play on your top line, right? He can play on a power play. He can play at even strength. He can get up and down the ice really quickly. And then, like I said, that one shot goal scoring ability. But, if he's not on that team, I'm not going to be all that surprised, just because of the depth they have up front and the fact that he just doesn't have that built-in long-term relationship with Hockey Canada. And I think that's going to be a mountain that he's going to have to climb at camp.
Yeah, so absolutely, and it'll be interesting to watch. The other guy that will be playing in the World Juniors from the Chicago Wolves is Felix Unger-Sorum. He's got 4 assists in 17 games so far, but I think so much of his game is also what he does away from the puck. He's a guy that has good two-way skills. I think actually going to the World Juniors is going to be helpful to him. He hasn't necessarily made that transition. That's another guy that I think you go back to last season, and Carolina was saying, "Hey, this kid might make our team." So it's really interesting to see that, that they've had some of these guys kind of get close. But I know you're a fan of the player, but I want to get us to the next segment here, because it's one that I've been really waiting to talk about. And it's one of the things I'm most excited to talk about on this podcast. So we're going to go. So Felix Unger-Sorum will be playing for Sweden, but here's the next part, Cam. This is the thing that this is fascinating to me. And we are in a new world. One of the biggest topics when you and I were at the CHL USA Challenge was talking about the NCAA and the fact that now CHL players can go play in the NCAA. And next year, we've got a late 2007 birth date who happens to be one of the most talented young hockey players anywhere in the world by the name of Gavin McKenna. And it will be his draft season. And he has played and dominated in the WHL. He seems to me to be one of the top candidates to be among the underage players, the guys that are differently, that are not the overagers, because we've seen a lot of overagers and 19-year-olds commit to college programs. This is a guy that still has some great junior hockey eligibility left that could be moving on. What is the latest? I know that you're working on something, and what is the latest that you have heard about the potential of Gavin McKenna considering the NCAA?
Well, I mean, like you mentioned there, is that yes, I'm working on a big piece. I'm talking to all sorts of people, and from his camp and from the NCAA and NHL people, and just a couple of interesting notes that people need to consider when they're thinking about McKenna. Because obviously, if he put his hat in the ring, he would be the most sought after hockey recruit probably ever. So he's already finished his high school courses. Okay. He's not 17 yet. I don't know about you. I certainly wasn't finished my high school courses a year and a half early. Yeah. McKenna is the grades are there. The schooling's done. If he wants to move on to college, he can do that. We don't get to see that too often, right? Zach Werenski did it. Jonathan Taves did it. Macklin Celebrini did it. We don't see it that often, though, where a guy fully accelerates a year of school so that he's ready if he can go to school. So that part, it's already in the bank. A lot of people are pointing at the NIL money thing, the name and likeness and imaging. And so, some of these players in the States are going to make a lot of money. Like some football players are going to make millions of dollars playing college football. It won't be the same for McKenna. Okay. So if you're not an American citizen, you have to go there on a student visa, and there's limits to what you can make. So the money isn't going to be a factor for him. He's going to be a millionaire anyways, but that's not going to come into play. And so right now it's such an awkward situation is because like he's playing for Medicine Hat, right? He's not going anywhere anytime soon. And so like you sit down and you ask the kid, you're like, hey, Gavin, where are you going to play next year? And it's like, I'm focusing on right now, right? I'm focusing on playing for Medicine Hat, being a good team, going to the World Juniors, having a great showing there. Medicine Hat, they didn't get the Memorial Cup bid that they had put in for, which was pretty surprising for two reasons. One, the CHL could have probably given themselves a leg up in keeping McKenna, maybe, if they had given them that one. Maybe, right? And Medicine Hat projects to have a much stronger team than Kelowna does for next year. Now, I know that Kelowna lost their bid because of COVID, and the CHL owed them a little bump there, but still, I think that was an interesting decision, and maybe, just maybe, sheds a little more light into how they feel about, are we even going to keep them anyways? Because do kids really stay up at night dreaming about winning a Memorial Cup? No, they don't. They're winning World Junior Golds and they're winning Stanley Cups. That's what most of these hockey players are thinking about, especially from Canada. So I'm not sure if it would have moved the needle or not, but I mean, it's going to be a very interesting, with his reps there at CAA, where everybody's talking about Michigan. I mean, Michigan State. There's going to be BU. There's going to be BC. There's going to be every team that's going to line up for him. It's just whether or not he wants to do it.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of good points, a lot of different things to consider. And it's like, usually we'll see a USHL player, announce their commitment up to a year, 2 years in advance of where they're going to go. I think in McKenna's case, that would make things really awkward for him, because this is such a new thing where you say, oh, well, I'm proud to have my commitment to whatever, Michigan or wherever you're going to go. Well, you just told your teammates, hey, I'm leaving, and it's a different dynamic. Like in the USHL, that's the accepted mode of, they're developing players to get ready for college, just as much as they are for the NHL, if not more so. And that's not been the CHL philosophy. So you're also dealing with like a kind of a cultural difference there. The WHL schedule isn't exactly forgiving. It's not going to allow Gavin McKenna the opportunities to go visit schools during the year, different things like that. So, but to your point, I do think we are talking about the biggest recruit in NCAA hockey history, and we'll call him a recruit because whether he decides to go or not, it's an option that is now available to him, and teams are going to be calling him. And my thought is, he's one of the best young hockey players. As you mentioned, he doesn't turn 17 until December of this year. He has accomplished pretty much everything he can in junior hockey. And now we have this hybrid step. He wouldn't be able to go into the AHL as an underage player, but he can go to college hockey, which a lot of people are viewing more as that preparation for pro, where you're practicing more, you're getting your body, you're developing physically as well. And, I think a lot of people don't really realize how good and the facilities of an NCAA team are, and the strength and conditioning program and the nutrition and all these different things. There's a lot more bells and whistles at these big money programs than you can have even at the junior level. So that's enticing for players. And as you mentioned, there is that CAA connection. Think about some of their past advisees, we'll call them, to keep everybody NCAA eligible, is the Owen Power, Michael Hage, the different players that have gone, and yes, they've gone to Michigan. But there is Macklin Celebrini, who went to Boston University, a little bit of a different thing. But that has been a tried and true method, and that's obviously one of the most powerful agencies in sports and in entertainment. And that's a philosophy that they've had. All of the Hughes brothers, except for Jack, who went straight to the NHL. So it's a really interesting time. So let me ask you, Cam Robinson, if you're Gavin McKenna, what is your pick if you're going to play NCAA hockey?
Where am I going to play?
Yes.
Gosh, hey, it's so tough. I would love to be Gavin McKenna and just have that recruitment too, and just get all those. You can go
literally anywhere.
Right, you can go anywhere. I'm trying to think, because you want to win a ship, right? Because you're only going to play one season, and it's like Leonard and Perreault aren't coming back. Higgins isn't probably coming back, so BC is going to take a big hit. BU, they're going to lose Willander too. It's tough. I mean, maybe it is Michigan, right? Maybe it's. I don't know. Honestly, it's the two Bostons, it's Michigan. That's really probably the three spots that he's going to consider realistically, and that's no inside information on that. Maybe he goes to St. Cloud State, or maybe he goes to Maine and he shocks us all, or Minnesota or something like that, right? Tries to stay a little closer to the west, right? But Alaska,
and I'll tell you, like Denver, I think Denver is going to try their hardest too. I mean, you look, David Carl is going to be at the World Juniors. I think that they have an appetite for the amazing thing is they have won these championships without really, until Zeev Buyum, they have won these championships without that mega recruit that they've had. I mean, Henrik Borgstrom was there a few years ago. He was a big time guy. You know, that Jason Zucker was a big, you know, he wasn't a first round draft pick, but like they have done it without a mega recruit. And so that's one guy. But I think if I'm Gavin McKenna, you know, I don't know that I'm not sure if James Higgins is going straight to the NHL after next season. I could see the two of us being the highest scoring under 18 players ever, going and being, you know, teammates and having a 1-2 punch of that, or maybe playing on the same line or anything like that. There's a lot of options. And the thing is that, you know, I think Gavin McKenna is going to be really one of those guys that goes to a much higher level. You know, no matter what path he chooses, we're talking about a supreme talent that is going to be among the biggest stars in the game that we've seen. And I can't wait to see it. And also when you mentioned Michigan, I think about the skating ability of Michael Hage and Gavin McKenna in the same place. I was like, who's going to slow those guys down? A lot of great things. All right. So that'll be the most fascinating thing to follow. We will be covering it nonstop here on Called Up as we start looking at some of these players as they make those decisions. You know, we even talk about, is Porter Martone, if he doesn't go straight to the NHL, is he an option to go to the NCAA? Is any of these players, is Michael Misa an option to go to the NCAA? Like all of these players that were never in the mix now could be. And so I think there is a way, and we'll talk about this more in depth at another time, but I think there is a way for both the CHL and the NCAA to benefit from this. That will lead to other places not benefiting from it. But I do think that both the CHL and the NCAA could have more good players choose their path than have ever chosen it before, and everybody benefits that way. So we will have to wait and see. All right, this is our last segment of the show. Finally, we've gotten here, and I think as we go forward, we're going to be mixing and matching and doing all kinds of different things. But Cam, I've got a burning question for you because it's been funny to watch this debate. And not funny because I think it's a legitimate debate, but people have talked about Connor Bedard struggling right now. Is he going to be okay? Is he a bust? I don't know. If you're saying that, stop. But you know, all those different things. But I'm going to ask you, because I think there is actually some hearty conversation that could be had around this. Each week, we're going to close the show with one big question. And this big question is, you're making a roster and you have two players to choose from. You have Macklin Celebrini or Connor Bedard to be the centerpiece for your rebuild. Who do you choose and why?
Oh my goodness, Chris.
Yeah,
it's not hurts me because
asked that question a year ago, it might have been a different kind of conversation.
It was easier, but at the same time, we did recognize what was coming up here. And so, you know, I think I'm going to say Macklin Celebrini. And now this is because I'm building a team to win a championship. And I think that Connor Bedard's going to put up bigger numbers throughout his career. I do. I think that he's going to pop off. I think he's going to be a 100+ point guy regularly in his prime. I think Mac's going to be, you know, 80s, 90s, maybe he pushes triple digits, but I think he's the type of player you win with. That when the chips are down in the playoffs, the bigger body, better details defensively, harder nosed, plays that hard skill game. When the whistles get put away in the playoffs, I think he's the guy. When the chips are down, that's the type of player that you're going to need to win with. Not to say that Bedard can't win, but I think you might want to insulate a player like Bedard with someone like Macklin Celebrini, or someone who has that hard skill that can do some of that heavy lifting, that deep, dirty digging, to allow him to get that, you know, that toe drag release off, like it's his all-world shot. And just, you know, again, even if Bedard had 20 goals right now already and 35 points or something like that, I don't think it would change my answer too much, because we're talking about winning and not just fantasy hockey and counting stats.
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't sure which way we were going to go. Just so everybody knows, we don't try to we don't poison the well here, and we're not just going to say things that we don't believe. But you know what, I was a little surprised, but really I agree. Like that's the thing is, like, I feel like Macklin Celebrini doesn't need, like, he can drive things on his own. He's good at the two-way skill. He's physical. He's actually kind of nasty at times. And I think Bedard is gaining that, but he doesn't have, you know, maybe he gives an inch or two away and other things like that. But you almost do feel like there needs to be a complementary player. When I look back at the Chicago Blackhawks of old, I'm saying, okay, if the Chicago Blackhawks are going back and building, and had to choose one of Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews at that time in their prime, I think they're picking Toews as the guy. Whereas you needed that Selke caliber defensive forward that also has skill. The other thing that we're seeing with Macklin at the NHL level is, yes, Connor Bedard has the better goal scoring ability. Macklin Celebrini has elite level goal scoring ability. He has a tremendous shot. He puts himself in great positions. He is going to score goals in this league in a large number. So again, we're talking about two of the very, very best young players. We're talking about two guys that are going to define this league for decades to come. This is a hair splitting but I think it comes down to, I see Macklin Celebrini more as that, Jay Pandolfo called him Sidney Crosby light last year. And I was like, gosh, that's lofty. I think he was underselling it. He might just be Crosby.
No, he's not Crosby. He's not Crosby. Well, I said nobody's Crosby. I said last year that he's if Jonathan Toews and Sidney Crosby had a baby. And that, so it's not quite.
He
gets a little watered down, but sometimes it gets magnified in there too, right? Like he's got that kind of juice. Nobody's Sid, but you're right. He might be Jonathan Toews.
Yeah, and that's prime Toews is an elite level player, an MVP of an Olympics with some of one of the best Olympics we've ever seen. So I mean, it's really, really fascinating to see. And I honestly, one thing that I will say as a prospect, I don't like us when we pit these players against each other, but it's it's obviously what we do, right? It's either or, right? And you're making those decisions. And I think, those two guys, it's going to be interesting to follow, but gosh, what are they putting in the water in Vancouver, dude? Like what is you're on the island out there. Like these kids, because you think about them, Chloe Primerano and the best young women's player. What's happening in Vancouver and what can they teach us about developing elite level hockey players? So
West Coast,
we'll save that for
baby.
another podcast. What's that?
Yeah. Right now, I said West Coast, best coast, but the moral of the story from this podcast is we're going to see, it's going to say Peters and Robinson called Bedard a bust, right? That'll be the headlines tomorrow.
That's going to be, that's called getting radioed. And that's why, that's how you make money in the podcast world. So I guess we're going to do that. Right. So, but anyway, Cam, this was a fun first episode. We covered a lot of ground. I think we'll tighten things and do a lot of different things. Fans, stick with us. We're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. We've got a huge World Junior preview coming up. But Cam, let's take a second to plug what's coming up on EP with you and what you guys got cooking over there.
Oh yeah, it's 'tis the season, right? We're going to be starting full swing into the World Juniors here. We got our app coming out soon, which is very, very exciting. I'll be on site for the World Juniors, giving great coverage. Hopefully, you guys won't get tired of my face yet, all over social media and all that good stuff. We're just keep churning it out at EP and try to up our game.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see what you have. We also at Flo will be having a lot of World Junior coverage. We'll have a team on site there, including myself. We will be providing some very in-depth U.S. coverage, but we'll also be covering the tournament at large. We'll have people at both rinks. So a lot coming up there. Want to remind you to go ahead and download this podcast, subscribe to it on your app of choice. Make sure you're never missing an episode. Watch us on YouTube, watch us on FloHockey. You'll see clips throughout FloHockey and EP social media. You will see me and Cam more than you've ever wanted to, but that'll be fun. And I'm looking forward to getting out and hopefully we can do something together while we're in Ottawa. Maybe we do a podcast while skating the Rideau Canal or something like that. I mean, that's probably impossible for me and you together in the cold of whatever that will be and how internet works outside. But in this modern technology, we're going to figure it out. But I want to just say a huge thanks to everybody that has listened. Obviously, the previous podcast talking hockey sense and now coming over to here. I'm just really excited to get this thing going with you, Cam. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it. Want to also give a huge shout out to Ever helping us work through some things on the podcast and producing our show today. I want to thank all the folks at FloHockey and EP for making this possible as well, for allowing Cam and I to join forces in this new podcast. And we hope that you guys will really enjoy the show. A lot of fun things will be coming up. So subscribe, like, comment. Cam, looking forward to doing this again real soon with you, pal. Let's have some fun with this one.
Sounds good, buddy. We'll see you next week.
All right, everybody. Yep. We'll see you next time. This is Called Up, the Prospects podcast. For Cam Robinson, I'm Chris Peters. We'll see you real soon.